All right, well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and jump in, and I know a few more will still be joining us as time goes on. You can see here on the screen, please don't be shy about jumping in and having a social conversation with us. We love you guys to take screenshots and tweet and all those kind of things, so you can see our hashtags and Twitter handles there as well. I want to start with a pretty interesting question that you may not see a lot when it comes to webinars. But why are you guys here, right? Are you here because your boss told you to attend this webinar, but you're really kind of multitasking right now and you're looking at other things? Are you here because maybe you're starting a new project on SharePoint, maybe a migration, going to an upgrade, looking at SharePoint 2016 and maybe you want some tips? Or are you kind of one of these that despite your best efforts, you still have very low engagement, little to no user adoption, and really just want some tips and know how to do better when you're trying to go forward and implement this? And there's a lot of things there, but I think this why question and this why word is a powerful word. So what I want you guys to do is, just like you would anything, why are we doing this, right? Take a few seconds now and just decide what you guys want to get out of this. And if you're so inclined, would love for you just to put it right there in the questions panel and just say, hey, this is what I'm really looking to get out of this. I can't promise that I'll hit everything in the next hour that you put in here and try to make sure I cover that, but I do promise to go through every single question, comment that I get, and we'll follow up directly with any tips, advice, and reach out to any person who wants to reach out. So we love your stories. We want you to share your stories, so please don't be shy about doing that. The truth is SharePoint struggles for a lot of different reasons. If you've been in any one of my sessions before, you've probably seen a slide like this. And if you're not struggling with SharePoint yet, consider yourself very lucky, right? But get ready, because 3 out of 5 organizations at some point struggle with SharePoint. It's crazy, and this number is actually going up. 2 years ago, the same survey had the number of 61%. So as things are getting better, technology is getting better, we're doing worse in terms of how we're using these technologies and going forward with that. And in addition to that, adoption is one of the biggest reasons why people are struggling with SharePoint. 1 out of every 3 orgs struggles with adoption and engagement. And so 30+% of organizations out there, people are either circumventing the system, don't want to use your SharePoint, don't know how to use your SharePoint. And so there's a lot going on, and you guys may say, yeah, that sounds a lot like me. So here's why we're here. Here's to answer that why question, and hopefully you guys have kind of thought about that for a second. We're here because the value of SharePoint doesn't come from what SharePoint can do, how great it looks, all the fancy things it can do, the workflows and the document libraries and the collaboration, right? That's not why we're here. That's not where the value of SharePoint comes from, right? The value comes from when people actually use it to do their jobs better, to innovate more, to really just be better than they would be without it. So ultimately, that's why we're here. That's what I want to do in this session. I want to give you guys some tips, hopefully, that you'll walk away with, and we'll jump in from there. For those that don't know me real quick, my name's Curtis Hughes. I'm one of the co-founders and managing partners here at C5 Insight. You can see my contact info there on the screen. Feel free to reach out to me. I'd love to connect with you guys, and kind of where I focus a lot of my time in the areas that I spend the majority of my time in. So feel free to reach out, and this is something I'm super passionate about: adoption, engagement, and really collaboration as a whole. Before we jump into really the meat of this presentation, right, that's what you guys are here, these 5 steps for better SharePoint adoption. What I wanted to do is kind of tell you a little bit about where this and some of our other sessions come from. And again, if you've seen my sessions, you may have seen this slide before. So long story short, a few years ago, we realized that a lot of the organizations that were coming to us saying, hey, can you help us out? These weren't people trying to put SharePoint in for the first time or put in something else for the first time. These were people that had it. Maybe had it for many, many years, tried multiple versions. Maybe it was new and only had it for a short period. But around 60% of the people that were coming to us basically had SharePoint already, but were struggling with it. And a lot of these were actually struggling with it from an adoption standpoint. And so that's why we put together, I've got a 7 Deadly Sins session you've probably seen. A lot of my sessions come from really, hey, what's going on? Why are so many people struggling with this, and what can we do, and what do we see? Every single day for the last 15 years or so, we've been dealing with these issues, and I've kind of been in the SharePoint space for over 15 years now, since it was version 1 and beta. So we're seeing a lot of adoption issues and why those have happened. So that's really where a lot of this comes from. And again, a lot of people say, hey, these 5 steps, these things I'm going to show you guys over the next 45 minutes or so, Some of these are going to seem very obvious to you guys, and I've actually had, you know, some honest feedback from people that said, "Hey, you didn't really tell us anything new. There's, you know, these are obvious things," and I've had a couple people even say that, but they still need to be said, and there's a lot in them, and I'll try to talk through that. And I've actually changed this session and expanded it to make it dig a lot deeper into each of these 5 areas. So you guys wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't still be talking about this if organizations honestly weren't still struggling with this, right? That's why I still talk about it. So these may look obvious, they may look big, but definitely reach out and be happy to dig into these more. But there's a lot behind these. So again, this is one of those ones that seems simple and obvious, right? Have a plan. Yeah, duh, Curtis, right? We know we need to have a plan. We know we need to get it right. But you'd actually probably be pretty surprised, and you'd think that it was pretty obvious. But the fact is, only 1 in 6 companies, 16%, have a formal adoption plan. They have a formal plan that says, here's how we're going to get people trained on this, here's how they're going to use it, here's how when new people come on board they're going to use it. Only 1 in 6 organizations. So, you know, are you guys in that bunch? Do you guys have a formal plan? And really, the adoption plan is only part of a larger kind of roadmap, and we do a lot of roadmap planning here as well. You can't really develop a plan or roadmap of where you want to go if you don't know where you are right now, right? So how is your adoption today? Are you guys adopting? You guys may say, hey, I want better adoption. How good is our adoption? Have we measured it? Do we know how to measure it? All those kind of things. I'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So we need to know if you know, it's getting better. How do we know when we're done? How do we measure it? And those kind of things. And it's funny because we plan so much in business, right? So why don't we plan for how we're going to get people to use this, and not just use it? Because what we're hearing a lot of these days is actually people saying, "Hey, I'm kind of through the honeymoon stage, right? It started off strong. We did all those great things, and people were really engaged. After about a year in, you know, we've not got really a whole lot of engagement now. People aren't using it as much, and all those kind of things. And so what I want to talk about, and the things I'm actually going to tell you, these 5 steps will give you sustainable adoption, not just this week, this month, this year, but ongoing, so that people will use this, and you'll have momentum to go back and get more funding, more budget, and do a lot more really cool things with SharePoint that I know you want to do. So it's not automatic. Just building SharePoint and saying, hey, if we build it, they will come, it's not just going to happen. So there's a lot of struggles, and we can tie a lot of those struggles together with what's going on in SharePoint. You know, early on in our engagements with our clients, one of the first things we do is establish a steering committee and some sort of leadership team. And this is really, this team helps shape the plan and helps build it. So if you guys don't have a leadership team or some sort of steering committee, I would advise you to do that. This team can help build out, you know, what the plan looks like from an adoption standpoint, and who we need to adopt. And really, you don't want to do this alone, right? We all need a little bit of help. And more importantly, this group is really important after the project kind of quote-unquote goes live, right? Long-term, the sustainability, how do we stick to the plan? How do we execute the plan? How do we make sure we're still delivering what we said we would deliver a year ago? So in essence, this team's the driver, right? This is the person driving the car, so that even though you're on cruise control and maybe everything's out there, you've still got someone with their hands on the wheel saying, hey guys, how are we doing with this? How's it going? And we've got a ton of resources and information and planning around building this team, because there's obviously a lot more to it than just saying, hey, build a SharePoint team. And so I'll talk more about this a little bit later on, and you'll hear the word, you know, why a lot. I've already asked the question why one time, you know, why are you guys here? You'll hear me say why. I love that word why. I don't honestly think we ask it enough today. And you'll hear why a lot more. And so why not share it with you guys again now? We found this to be a virtual certainty every single time. That's why I put it up here. It's a nice quotable, but it's so true. Users will never find their way, never figure out what they're trying to do, how they're trying to do it. And I'll talk about this a little bit more later on, until you as an organization and as a group and a department understand, why are we doing this? What are we trying to solve? What are we doing? And a lot of people, I mean, again, it's one of those things that sounds obvious, but you'd be surprised in practice how many people really aren't digging in and asking the right questions about, why are we really doing this? You know, yeah, we need an intranet. Okay, what does an intranet mean? Does it mean document management? Does it mean collaboration? Does it mean social? Does it mean all of the above? Why are we doing these things, and what do they really mean? And so, you know, it's easy enough to know all that, and all of that is really great, and a plan is great, and knowing why is great. But there's one thing that will always come back to haunt you, and that you guys really need to determine, and that is your organization and are you and is your department ready to collaborate on a tool like SharePoint and to use a tool like SharePoint? It sounds kind of silly, but you know, talking to a lot of organizations, they do all the right things, but culturally behind the scenes, they're just not ready. The foundation isn't there, if you will, to build the building on top of it. It's a shaky foundation. It's built on sand, whatever it may be, right? So it's not really there. So I put together this nice quick assessment. I call it kind of the 60-second SharePoint success assessment. And I'll give you guys, if you stick around to the end, I'll give you guys the download link so you can actually download the PDF and do this yourself. But basically, you answer those 4 questions on the top left, and you ask yourself, you know, how many sound like my organization? And you check the boxes there. And then you do the ones in the middle there on the bottom. How many sound like my organization? You check the boxes there. And then the number of check boxes on the top left, you circle that in the first line. Number of check boxes in the middle bottom there, you circle that on the second line. And you draw a line between them where it intersects the orange line. And that'll actually tell you about how likely you are to have SharePoint success. So if we go through an example, let's say I say our best work is produced by individuals, someone to succeed, someone else won't succeed, and we work regularly with other departments. So you can see the ones I checked there on the screen. I then draw a line between that. So 2 on the first one, 1 on the second one. I've got a below average chance of succeeding with SharePoint. And this has been eerily accurate. It's not super scientific, but we've seen these things come into play in these questions, and I wanted to make it really simple. So again, if you want a PDF download of this, stick around. I'll give the link at the very end. But this is an easy way for you to take to your management and say, look, guys, we got bigger problems. You know, it's not just throwing internet at it. If you want this to be sticky, you want it to maintain, to be sustainable, we've got to do some other things from an organization standpoint and figure that out. This is another one of those areas that a lot of people say, well, duh, yeah, it's obvious. We got to think about people, right? But again, I wouldn't keep putting it in most of my presentations if it weren't important, right? And I know this is a huge bucket, if you will. This is a big area. Put people first. Yeah, what does that mean? So I'm going to give you guys some practical things, and I'll talk a little bit about this and drill down. And this is a big one where I could probably, and I have actually done an entire presentation just on the people part of SharePoint. But that's why you're here, right? You're here to get people to use these tools better, right? But somewhere along the way, it's funny with all the latest gadgets and technology, especially if you're on 365, and there's so much awesome technology and tools out there. Somewhere along the way, we got caught up in just building stuff. I mean, really, a lot of organizations are building stuff and even have good, you know, problems they're trying to solve sometimes, but forget about the people that are actually having to use these. And I already talked about when I started that, you know, the value of this entire SharePoint and whatever you're building, your intranet, whatever you're using SharePoint for, the value is not going to come from building it. Doesn't matter. If you build it and no one uses it, it's just nice, shiny things sitting over here on the shelf that no one uses. The value is going to come from people using it, getting engaged on it, and that's where you get productivity, innovation. That's where the actual ROI really comes from. So it kind of makes sense, you know, that we spend time on people, since those are the ones that are going to do it. So a lot of people say, well, what kind of things do I ask? How do I put people first? So really for us, it just starts with some questions, and we see people that I mean, there's some simple questions you could ask, but people just don't think about it. So I'll give you some examples. First and foremost, you know, what do your people value? What do they think about most often? What are they struggling with right now? What do they need? What do they need to do their jobs better? How can we equip them? Those you may say, yeah, those are obvious. I've already thought about those. Well, here's a couple more that we've seen really come up in the last few years, especially. For instance, how many of you guys on here can tell me how many millennials you have in your organization right now? How many millennials that will use SharePoint? What's the breakup? You know, what about baby boomers, Gen X? Can you tell me what generations use different parts of your intranet and your SharePoint? What about how many use mobile to check email versus the desktop, right? There was a stat that I read in the last month or so that said when we're in the office, we actually spend 50 to 60% of our time not at our desk now. So we're running around meetings, doing whatever. We're actually not at our desk. Do you know what percentage? Are you an organization where 50% of your organization is at the desk and 50% are mobile? Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe 10% are mobile and the rest are at their desk. Do you know these things? And those are some questions that, again, digging deeper, a lot of people don't think about. And so really knowing who your users are, how do they work, we call this a lot of times persona development, developing out these personas. Who are the people? And put them in buckets of using this. How do they use it? And we've got hundreds of questions that we go through and kind of in our planning sessions with clients to help them figure out who are the people. How do we define our people? And then when you start finding these things and implementing them, you know, making sure that we give them some immediate value. That's one of the biggest things we see is, hey, we found out some things that are valuable to them, but we got to build the servers, we got to do all these things, and then next thing you know, it's 2 years before there's any value rolled out to the users. And that's one surefire way for people to just say, yeah, forget about it, I'm going to do my own thing and go out here and get a Dropbox account. So don't bother, right? And that's how adoption goes way down. So it's pretty interesting, and you got to make sure you're focusing on that. So instead of focusing really on the technology, take some time really now to shift your focus to planning for people. And I love this quote. This is from a Gartner study. It's a really, I'll show you another piece of this a little later on, but talking about how people just really need to shift their thinking from the technology. And again, I know every single person on this webinar probably has SharePoint, right? You already have SharePoint, maybe having other licenses, but my guess is most of you guys already have SharePoint. So I'm not saying throw away SharePoint, but what I'm saying is lay SharePoint aside for a second. Know that you've got this great tool over here, but how are people working? Who do they work with? What are their needs? What are they trying to do? And then go over and figure out what the right tools are. Maybe it's SharePoint, maybe it's a combination of SharePoint and something else, maybe it's not SharePoint at all, right? Figure out exactly what your users need. So, you know, I'll ask you guys kind of a funny question, but when was the last time you went to your garage, right? Grabbed a hammer out of the toolbox and then went walking around your house and saying, now what can I hammer on? What can I go hammer on today? And no one does that, right? We always start with a problem, you know, how are people working, and then we go to our toolbox and try to get it. So we're running to build a deck. We're trying to fix a leaky faucet. I need a saw. I need a wrench. I need a hammer. What tool do I actually need? And that's what we try to get people and our clients to understand is lay the technology aside. Try to understand really deeply about your people. This will affect adoption. A lot of people say, hey, this is going to slow us down. We can't do this. I guarantee it will not slow you down. It'll seem like it's slowing you down, but what will happen is the implementation will go much faster. So we actually see projects finish faster and using less budget by taking the time to do these 5 things I'm going to share with you here. So just because it seems like we're kind of slowing down, it'll pay dividends later. Trust me on that. We've done it hundreds and hundreds of times. So put down the hammer. Stop trying to solve problems kind of with SharePoint and really understand and just listen. Listen to your users and try to figure out what they are and what they're trying to do. Because, you know, I don't make a whole lot of guarantees if you know me, but I do guarantee that if you start planning and putting people kind of at the center, you draw people right at the center, you start planning around how are people going to interact with this, who's this going to impact, is it going to impact them negatively, positively, all those things, right? Make it user-centered, people-centered. I guarantee that you will have better adoption. That is my guarantee for the day. If it's user-centered, it's always going to be user-supported. People will want to use it, right? And that's the part we've been missing. It seems so kind of, you know, like an aha, but we've really been missing this user-centered piece, and I really think organizations really need to get back to that. One of the things that we've done here at C5 is actually we've built a solution that works on SharePoint, and it allows you to quickly and easily capture feedback from your users. So you make it about them, right? You find out what they actually care about, right? It's a novel idea. And so we all like to be involved. We all like to be heard. Everybody does, even your users. So I'm curious, you know, how many of you guys have a formal feedback mechanism for your users? Hey, if you get feedback, negative, positive, whatever it is, hey, this is how you submit that. And maybe it's just an email to someone, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Maybe you don't have one, and a lot of people sometimes have that mechanism, but are you following up? Do you have a feedback loop that tells the user, hey, we've actually taken this and we're actually going to implement this in the 3rd quarter of this year? Do you have that? That drives adoption, people knowing that they've been heard. They don't want things to go into a black hole, right? They don't want things just to go into this abyss and nothing happens with it. And so we built this to actually be what we call in the flow, because going back to the email issue, I mean, when we're on SharePoint, when we're on these tools and we're working, none of us are there just to kind of, you know, like Facebook and just goof off, read some news, do some things. We're there to do work, right? We're very task-driven people. And so the worst thing that we can do is ask our users to say, hey, whenever you run into something, would you just stop, go over your Outlook and just email Bob or email support, or maybe even worse, put in a support ticket, and so that we can know your feedback. How many of you guys are getting that kind of feedback, right? Nobody does that. Everybody needs something that's in the flow, that's real time. So we developed this solution. It works on SharePoint Online, SharePoint On-Premise. It installs this little feedback icon you can see up on the top there. All across the pages, you can put it on different site collections. You click that feedback, it pops a dialog so you never lose the page. It tracks the page they're on. They can put their feedback in, hit send, and that goes to a list. Very simple, using SharePoint all out of the box. and then you can set alerts, workflows, whatever the heck you want to on that list, permissions, however you want to do it. But really quickly, within 2 seconds, someone can give you feedback, and it's amazing how much the feedback's gone up for people that have used this solution. So you got to make it easy for people, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on too, about making things easy. So again, another tool, this and the assessment, the success assessment, I'll give you both the download links. If you want this, I'll give you this SharePoint feedback tool free. If you guys stick around, I'll give you the link at the very end where you guys can go download this and try it out in your environment. Hopefully that'll help you guys, and that'll be something that you can really take away and use from today's session. So biggest thing, make it easy to get feedback, but also do something with it. Make sure the loop's there, and make sure that you actually tell the users what you're actually doing with that. To me, this is another one of those missing links in organizations today, and I hope you have kind of an aha moment with this one, and I kind of did as I was going through and thinking about this over the last few years and when this really hit me. But at the end of the day, SharePoint, if used as a tool and the right tool, you know, it can be what we call a bridge, right? It can be a bridge builder to help people connect to both each other and the organization. So I like to think of that as a bridge, right? Building a bridge. But SharePoint is really the tool, right? You got to build a bridge, and I want to give you guys a couple practical ways that we can build bridges, and a lot of that throughout this is there. But as a high level, you know, for this step, number 3, think about yourselves as bridge builders. Your job, once you focus on the people and figure that out, once you have a plan, you need to figure out how to connect people to the organization, to what they're trying to get, maybe connecting them to the information they need at the right time so they don't have to search for it and weed through everything, connecting them to each other so they can find out who's doing what. There's a lot of reasons. So you guys are a bridge connecting 2 sides of these worlds together, and that's the best way I can describe it. And the more bridges you build in your organization, the more engagement and adoption you're going to have. But the fact is, bridges honestly can be scary sometimes, right? There's some huge bridges that are really high, especially if it's a new bridge. You don't know, I mean, you're the first car across it. If it's brand new, it's big, it's different. I've never gone across the bridges that look like that. There's a whole lot of things that make bridges really scary, right? And truthfully, how many of us really like change, right? Change and adoption go hand in hand. Adoption is really managing that change. And I love this quote talking about I mean, if you want to have improvement and innovation and all those kind of things, you've got to have change. Change has to come before that. So we've got to have adoption, and we've got to know, you know, how that's going to happen. And you guys that are leading this adoption will have a better opportunity to manage that. So we'll talk a little bit more about change, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But how many of us have, you know, like it when the way we've done things for weeks, months, years is changed right in front of us? The rug's pulled out from under us, right? Even if we know it's for the better or kind of have an idea and someone told us it's for the better, how many of us like that change, right? Every single one of you guys are probably saying no, and your users are no different, right? They don't want to change as well. But again, without change, there's no innovation, there's no growth, and there's definitely no ROI. So I want you guys to be kind of these change agents, and maybe if you're in a larger organization, you've got change management processes and all those kind of things. You've got to embrace that for adoption, because adoption is really a lot about managing change and getting people, even once you build the bridge, then you got to get people to trust you and cross the bridge. And I'll talk about that right now and kind of go through what I mean there. So, how many of you like to underperform? You guys like to maybe do things slower. You like to make a mistake or two. How many of us really like that, right? None of us like that. And so I don't. Your users don't. I'm guarantee you don't. So part of this change and adoption and building these bridges is managing the expectation and knowing, hey, even once I build the bridge, I've got to figure out how to get people across that bridge and help them get across it. So what you see here on the screen is kind of a little graph I came up with that shows our user performance there on the left, and across the bottom we've got time, right? And so we're typically right here, right? This is where we are. We're doing things, we're not underperforming, we're doing things pretty good. Maybe, I mean, you hear people, I've done that for 10 years, 15 years, I developed that process, I've done it all that time. We have these tools like SharePoint, and what we want to do is we want to get here, right? We want to get all the way to the other side, and we want these things to be really awesome. And we know there's so much benefit on the other side. But do you guys see what's in between where we are now and where we want to go then? Right? We've got this nice big valley. We've got this dip in our performance, and that's typically how it goes. And this is one of the aha moments for me, is when I was like, wow, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Human nature is not, I mean, to put on the brakes, right, to not go down this slippery slope of this change, right? Because we're going to slow down. The new way of doing it, even if I know how to use SharePoint, it's still going to take me, I've got to go over here to upload, maybe it's this, but why do I do that? And I'll talk about that in a minute. So Your job is to be this bridge builder. Your job is to build this bridge between where your users are today and where you know they can go by using these tools. And you've got to figure out what are the right things for my organization, how do I get them to cross that bridge, how do I make sure they're doing it. So perfect example, nobody wants to underperform. And what we realized in talking to clients is that users were really resistant to change for the main reason, not because of change, but because they didn't want to do things slower. I mean, they've got 1,000 things to do, right? They've got all these things on their plate. SharePoint is not the only thing they have to do. It's a tool helping them do something. And opening up this Excel sheet, over here was so much easier. Why do I have to go over here and do this now, right? Why do I have to change it? So people put on the brakes, resistant to change, no adoption, and it goes on and on and on, right? So what we realized is that, hey, what if we did something where we gave everybody permission to just fool around on the internet, figure it out, waste a day, because most people could probably find that time. Many of them, what we found were the users didn't want to do that. Their managers, they were scared of what it would look like. They had to get this deadline done. So we worked with managers, we worked with everyone and the users. I mean, it was a big effort, but we coordinated it, and this is what you have to do. You have to get buy-in and said, hey, we're going to have an intranet play day, just for an example. This day, every deadline is moved. It's not due today. You're going to just be able to spend your whole day on the internet, or a half day, or an hour, whatever it is. But work with the people and give them permission to slow down. And it's amazing what that did for adoption, because then people were like, wow, this is cool. I can get to use this, and I don't have to worry about my boss getting on my back because I took time to learn this and was resistant to it, right? So hopefully that was kind of an aha. So you guys really have to spend your time in this area right here. This is where you guys need to spend a lot of your time figuring out, how do I make it easy once I build the bridge to get people to cross that bridge? Man, it's going to go so much better. So I like that analogy as well. And let me give you guys a couple more practical tips for kind of building this bridge and how we can get people across the bridge. So I don't know about you, but I don't work with just one application per week or per day, right? And this was a stat that came out I read recently. But on average, the typical the typical employee uses about 25 applications per week, right? So we're using a ton of different applications. So the last thing we need is SharePoint, our internet document management system, whatever it is. The last thing we need is for that to be another silo. And we see a lot of people creating intranets and these other things using SharePoint, and here it is. It's another silo. It's another place to go. It's not connected to our CRM, our ERP. I've got this other HRIS system. Now I've got our project tracking system. If we're a development company, I've got our code, all these systems, right, that we use every day, in Outlook, whatever it is. They're so disconnected. So one of the ways you guys can really start to build a bridge is to think about integrating the work of your users. And this again goes back to, what do our users think is valuable? What do they really find valuable? What do they want to do? What are the things that cause them trouble, and the 2 or 3 or 5 systems or 25 systems that they work on, right? Understanding those, that HR works on these 25 and engineering works on these 25. Most of you guys probably couldn't answer those questions of what applications our users use. So what's going to add value, right? How are they going to do that? So again, building a bridge using integration as a tip. Plain and simple, integration adds a ton of value. It makes things super easy. I'll talk about making things easy in just a minute. But this is one easy way, and again, I won't go into a ton of detail. We've got sessions on integrating SharePoint and CRM and some other things like that. A ton of ways you can integrate, but this is part of our planning that we do. What are the integration points that we can do to start building bridges within our organization? And the last thing I'll share on this is that at the end of the day, you really don't have to build this bridge yourself. And in fact, it's actually better for your adoption if you don't try to build the bridge yourself. It's amazing when we start to build communities, letting people know, communicating, letting people know, hey, here's what we're doing. Would you like to be involved? All those kind of things. Help us build these bridges. We want to connect these people. It's amazing how much engagement has gone up, because people will always support what they've helped create. It's a psychological thing. If you go off, do some planning, maybe even have some meetings with your users, then go off in a hole and for the next year or 6 months or whatever it is, build your application, they have no connection to that succeeding, right? It's just to them another thing. But if you can start to connect them to the vision and connect them to, hey, part of this succeeding or failing, it'd be amazing what adoption will do. And people will support it. They'll be champions for it. They'll get engaged. So don't try to build it yourself. Get people involved. Build out your teams, and find a way to get those people involved. You know, some organizations are doing a decent job with all of those things, right? They're having plans, they're building bridges, and they're doing all the right things we've kind of already talked about. But unfortunately, we see a lot of these bridges that are built they're not engineered very well, right? And sometimes those bridges are curvy, they're full of potholes, they're painful to cross, and there's just a lot of roadblocks. I don't know, I mean, how many of you guys have a SharePoint that looks like this picture, right? That's surrounded by electric, an electric fence and barbed wire. And most of you guys would say, oh, no, not me. Everyone can get access to ours. It's very open. Everybody gets easy access to it. And I say, maybe it is, but is it easy to do the things they need to do? Or do they have to jump through hoops to do certain things? Do you even know what your users think right now, right? Have you even asked if they think it's a roadblock? I guarantee if you did a feedback survey, whatever it was, your users, the majority probably will say, hey, I've got these roadblocks when using SharePoint. I guarantee there's always roadblocks. And so I want to talk about a couple, really three roadblocks that we see today that really surface themselves and really start to slow down adoption. And I'll talk about three specific ones. There's lots of these roadblocks that we've got. We kind of go through with our clients and kind of talk about the risk, which roadblocks make sense. Sometimes there's 10, 15 of these roadblocks or even more. I'm going to share just three of the biggies that we see kind of across the board with a lot of organizations. So anybody remember this, little company called Enron a few years ago, right? We have a lot of the compliance and things to think for them. And most of you guys, every one of you, I'm sure, has heard governance and those kind of things. And we're big proponents of governance. We build governance plans and those kind of things. But somewhere along the way, what happened was we started building so much governance and went way beyond the HIPAAs and all the other, ISO and all the other compliance things that we needed to do. And we made it really difficult for our users to collaborate. And when we go in sometimes and look at organizations that are having adoption problems, I mean, we see security issues that really, honestly, don't provide any value, don't have anything to do with HIPAA or the compliance. They're just there because they were kind of pushed out across, and that's what we've got to do, and not really thinking about how it impacted the user. And so I came up with this rigid at the core, flexible at the edges. So think of the sphere as SharePoint, right, as your implementation, and you've got these layers within it, right? And so every one of you guys within your organization has what it is, its core, right? These are the things that are the non-negotiables, the corporate metadata, the retention policies, maybe the homepage content, the moderation, what keywords maybe we can use that are bad words or anything like that, and making sure we have filtering on that. There's some core things that you don't want out there, especially if you're a publicly traded company, how long you audit, those kind of things. But everything else, honestly, and I've gotten a lot of pushback on this, but I'm sticking to it because we still see it time and time again. When you look really hard and when you dig into it, there's still things that are impacting collaboration and people being able to adopt these systems that just make it hard, and it's a roadblock, and we remove those, and it's amazing how adoption goes up. But things out at the edges, like your team sites, your project location, your project sites, your ad hoc sites that kind of come and go over the course of time, maybe check in, check out, personal views, all these other little things. There's thousands of these things, how you want to set up certain things that really don't matter. Let them do what they want to do, because at the end of the day, when you've got millennials coming in and you've got baby boomers working together, everybody works different. We've got Gen Z coming in now. We've got different people working different ways. We've got a guy on the plant floor that wants to look at things and do things differently than our HR manager. I mean, everybody's working and collaborating differently. So figure out what your core is, but don't make it so restrictive that we actually prevent people from adopting. Because I can tell you what people do is they're going to go around this, and they're going to say, it's so painful to get to that document or to do something. I'm just going to store it locally once I do get it, and my documents are maybe on Dropbox or somewhere, and then I can just find it everywhere. And then you've got another problem where you've got things that are out of sync and no one version of the truth, right? So you got to make sure that you're not being too restrictive and loosen up a little bit. That's kind of what I say with this. But it's a balancing act, right? You got to make sure you do it in the right way. It's definitely a balancing act. How many of you guys know or have heard of ROT, have heard of this R-O-T, this ROT thing, right? And so a lot of people really haven't heard of this, but this is one of the biggest things today that we spend a ton of time on, especially with migrations. If you guys are starting a migration and upgrade, something like that, where you guys are going from one version to another, maybe on-premise to online, anytime, right? It's a time, just like when you're moving a house, right? Time to do cleaning. Let's go through the attic and figure out what the heck we can purge out of here. So ROT stands for redundant, obsolete, and trivial. And these are three buckets, three categories, if you will, of content within our content management system within SharePoint. We use it as a document repository and document management system, but also list data and things like that. I won't go into this. I've got another session called Building a Better Internet where I go into this in more details and talks about getting rid of some of your ROT. But I would ask you guys, do you even know how much ROT you have? Do you know how much content in your organization can be classified redundant, obsolete, or trivial information? And if you don't, you ought to figure that out. It's pretty amazing how how much this costs organizations. And most organizations, when I talk to them, they say, oh yeah, we know that we've actually got 50% of our content, and we've got to buy bigger drives, and it's going to take more storage. That's the first thing people think of. More content, I've got to spend more on storage, right? Disk, drive, storage, all those kind of things. But that's actually only scratching the surface. The big issue is that, yeah, you're going to have to buy more storage. That's an easy thing. Storage is cheap, right? What happens is when you have all this rot out there, then you have poor findability. People can't find stuff on the internet or wherever it is, right? How many of you guys have trouble finding something? You search for something and it's not the first thing that comes up. You can't find it right away, right? Your users should be able to find something. Within 30 seconds, you should be able to find a single artifact across your entire SharePoint, exactly what you need within 30 seconds. But it causes low findability. Within that, you know what it leads to? It leads to frustration. People are like, well, I just can't find this. I'm just not going to use it. Man, SharePoint, hey, don't use SharePoint because you won't be able to find anything, right? And then low adoption, right? We've got this snowball effect, and then people start storing stuff ultimately like, hey, once I find it, if you can find it, just email that to me. Or I'm going to store it over here again, like I said, my OneDrive, my Dropbox, my desktop, an external flash drive, would even worse, right? And then you got data walking out the door all over the place, right? So the storage is the least of your problems, right? The big issue that you've got to worry about is how is this affecting adoption and usability and engagement, and it really, really, really affects it. So we actually go through content cleanup as part of our migration strategies with clients. We have templates that help you identify rot, redundant, what's trivial, identifying what those mean. So happy to share some of the stories of that with you as well. But I asked you kind of, do you know how much rot you think you have? Most of you guys maybe came up with a number in your head, but the average company considers about 58% of their content to be rot. And actually the EU and the European Commission went through an audit of their online content that was public last year actually, and they actually removed a staggering 80% of their content that they said it was redundant. 80% of the content that they had on this European Commission website, public website, was rot. Our average is usually around 50, 55%, so it's right in line with this. We usually see about 50% rot. On, if you take very conservative, let's just say it's half, 29, 30%, right, of you guys, of your content is probably rot. That's going to impact how your users are going to use it. So if you're thinking about a migration upgrade, I would definitely consider, hey, make it part of what we're doing and one of our line items in the project plan to try to go through and try to figure out how we're going to identify this rot and to get rid of it. You don't have to, you can make it searchable in a separate thing, archive it, but get it out of the way, get this noise out of the way, right? And the last thing I want to kind of show you guys in terms of this is kind of the ABCs that I call of less is more. A lot of times we do all these things right, maybe we don't have a ton of rot, but again, as we're building intranets and these platforms, these web-based platforms, we make it just really difficult to get stuff, right? And everything you guys do and how you lay it out and your navigation and everything on your sites, that's impacting, that's your direction. That's you telling someone how to get from point A to point B. And so I'll go through this ABC real quick. A is for attention span, right? You guys can read that. In our opinion, and there's been some other stats around this, someone should be able to hit a page on your intranet and within 2 seconds know pretty quickly where they need to go and what they need to click on to get to them. I mean, we're fast. Our brains work really fast, right? So within 2-3 seconds, your people should know. Are people hitting your site and going, what the heck, where do I go? What about a new user? Not people that have been there. What about a new user? Do they know where to go? Do they know how to figure things out? What if they don't know what a department does? Is it organized by department? And so my intranet session, I talk a lot about that as well. Bite-sized delivery, that's another big one, right? Delivering things in terms of just a little bite, then give them a bigger snack, and then give them a meal. People don't want, and it used to be minimize clicks. Give me 1 or 2 clicks to get me to my content. Now people are okay, if you think about how things are designed and you look out there, people are okay with 5, 6, 7 clicks, but they want information in small chunks to figure out really quickly within 2 seconds where I need to go. So give me just 4 or 5 menu items, and then once I click on that, give me another 10 or 15, maybe 20, and then once I click on that, give me the whole thing I'm looking for. Help me get there quicker, get there faster. And then the last thing is just consistency, making sure throughout that it's just easy to find stuff, right? That when I go from site to site and from department to department, and as I browse around, maybe you're doing hybrid online and on-premise, is it easy to get back and forth? Can I flow easily between them and know exactly where to go? So I'll give you 2 quick examples as we go through this, right? So the king of simple, right? Google up there in the top left corner, right? You've got that, and again, they're there to search. That's what you're there to do. You're here to search. But they've got these other things out in the corners, right? The top right corner, they've got some in the bottom left and bottom right. You can get to them, you can find them really easily, but they're out of the way. Make it clean, make it easy for what I'm there to do. And again, that goes back to understanding your user, right? What does your user care about when they go to the department side of this, or HR, or what do they care about? Do most people, when they go to HR, want benefits, or are they trying to fill out a PTO request, or are they trying to do this? Understanding your users. The other one here is the White House. You can see they have 5 items across the top. Our guidance now is about 5 to 7 max top-level menus, and you can see this is kind of the bite snack meal. They first just say issues. That's a really big. That's just a small bite. Click on that. They surface some of the popular ones. Then you can get some other things. You get a snack, right? Here's the top issues. Here's some other issues. You click on economy. Then you get your whole meal. Here's all the issues about the economy, and you can drill down. Making it easy for people to get to things and knowing how they want to get it. Make it easy. Don't provide a lot of roadblocks for people to kind of go through this. And the last thing I want to share with you guys is really, pretty interesting because up until this point, I haven't shared anything about, training your users. And most people, when they think about adoption, they think about training and how are we going to train our users and how are we going to teach them and educate them. A lot of stuff to do with that. It's step number 5, right? The other things are so much more important. You got to do this though, right? So how many of you guys like sitting in a long classroom session, right? You just want to sit around in a classroom all day, right? And if we're being honest, some of you and your users probably don't like doing any training at all, right? You just want to get started and get hands-on. So there's early adopters, there's late adopters. I'll tell you a quick story about a real-world scenario. So I wanted to test this theory out about training and how training has changed and things like that. So I went to a client of ours, didn't charge them for it. We needed to do some training, and I said, hey, I want to try something out, and we'll do all the training the normal way we would do it, but let me try this out. And so we spent 2 days on site with the client. We went through all the normal classroom training. We had hands-on, we had handouts, we had, up front, the presentation. We gave them breaks, we fed them, all the things you would do through classroom training. We were trying to make it as good as possible. Went over 2 days, went through everything, right, about their entire intranet. Then on the third day, we had one of our consultants sit in the conference room and said, hey, the whole company, we've got one of our guys, he's here in the conference room. Any questions you have, today's kind of the intranet play day, any questions you have about the intranet, how to do it, come up and ask him, any questions you've got. We tracked those questions. 90% of the questions that he got asked were things he covered in the previous 2 days. And that was really just surprising to me. That said, hey, you're right, people just don't retain it. People, again, people just don't have the time to retain that, and I'll talk about why that is in a minute. But we've got to think a little bit differently about our training. So, training is always going to be important. We've got to make sure we're training, and a lot of users say, hey, I need to be trained, I need to be well equipped to be able to do my job better. But in our 15 years of experience or so, training is an area where we've seen a ton of changes. And so what I want to do right quick is ask you guys a quick poll, if you would just answer, what kind of training methods do you guys use? So I'm going to launch this poll. If you guys will just take a minute and just quickly fill it out. What do you guys use? And if it's other, just put it in the questions there and ask any questions you want and tell me about some other ideas. But do you guys use any of these? What are the number 1 ways that you guys use these? We'll leave it up for another second or two. All right. So let me share this with you guys so you guys can see what the results are. So pretty interesting. We had a couple flips there at the end. I knew pages on the internet would be pretty high, and I'll come back to this a little later on. Mentoring, that's really good to see. Actually, the 80% did some one-on-one mentoring. Classroom, again, a big one there. Classroom training just doesn't work as well, and I'll talk about effectiveness in a little while. But a large percentage, what I pretty much expected, about 60% use the pages on the intranet and kind of a knowledge base and those kind of things. So that's good. So we'll keep going, and I'll come back to that in a minute and share with you why I asked that. But this is what our typical user looks like, right? This is what you guys look like, right? We're running from one meeting. We've got 1,000 things to do. We're inundated with information. We've got emails, voicemails. We've got to meet with that person. We've got to respond to these things, right? And so Microsoft actually did a study that actually showed that over the last 10 years, our attention span has dropped by 25%. And so we actually have an attention span now of 8 seconds, shorter than that of a goldfish. A goldfish has about 10-second attention span. So I'm actually surprised any of you guys are even still on this webinar listening to me. But it's surprising, right, that we're bombarded with information, and we're tuned, and our people are tuned to think in these 140 characters, tweets at a time, right, and all these small things. So the problem is we're not changing the way we're doing our training, right? We got to understand how people respond to this information overload and what it actually means and what we can do with that information. So let me talk a minute about that. So you see many organizations that just aren't adapting to it. So it's pretty in line. 60% of you guys said pages on the intranet. About 65% is the average from a recent study that use pages on the intranet as their primary education method. About 65%. So that's pretty much in line. One of the things I want to ask you guys, though, is how effective is it? Do you guys know, or are you measuring how effective that is? Do you go back and say, hey, was that effective? Should we do something else? What are our lessons learned, right? And so let me ask you this question real quick, and I'll just leave it up for a few seconds. How would you say your education method is working, right? How would you say it's working? Just take a minute for me and just click your vote real quick, and then I'll go on. Just a few more seconds. A couple more people could vote. All right, so I'm going to close this out. We only had about 70% voting, but it's pretty split. So let me go back and show you guys what this looks like real quick. So we got about a 50-50 split. The good news is nobody said we hardly have any adoption. So you guys have some adoption. We have a little bit, but hardly any engagement. So that's good. But you also have, some people have decent adoption. Well, here's one of the things I want to share with you guys from the same study, and I spent a lot of time looking at this. Out of that 65% that said, hey, we use pages on the internet, only 16% said that pages on the internet was very helpful or extremely helpful. In other words, it was successful. So this was the highest ranked education method, by the way, was pages on the internet, but it was the least effective, which is crazy. And so again, it just goes to show that we're not changing how we're doing things, and we keep doing things the same way. And I think a lot of it has to do with people just not understanding what's working, what's not, asking users, figuring out what the heck they want and what they need, and understanding that, hey, that didn't work. What are we actually trying to do here? So some of the new methods that we use these days are just-in-time training, so real-time. I think the biggest thing for us that we've done is kind of contextual training and real-time, because the truth is, one, we want things in bite-sized information, right? I don't want to sit there and watch an hour video on document management when all I need to know is how to restore a version, and it's at 45 minutes in or something like that, right? So we do our videos in 3 to 5 minute chunks. We break our videos down and we do video training. And then there's some great tools out there, Content Panda, Visual SP. I'm actually doing a webinar of Visual SP. I'll show you that in a minute on building a better intranet. They've got a great tool that we use for a lot of our clients as well that puts videos in context. So the thing that we've learned is that when people are in your SharePoint and working in your intranet, they're not going to stop, go try to figure it out, sort through 300 links on the intranet. We know the search doesn't work, right, because it's hard to find things. And so they just give up, they don't do it, they try to ask someone, and they get frustrated. I mean, again, you can see how all these things just snowball. You can make it really easy, and when I'm on document management and then a document library, show me the videos that are most popular that people are watching. Restoring a version, creating a custom view, whatever it is. I mean, there's little things we can do just to make such a big impact on how we're educating and training our users. So make it in the flow, make it small, bite-sized. And the other thing I'd say is make sure you guys have a method for ongoing training. We used to think, just like a lot of you guys probably, that training was this event that happened, right? Right before deployment, we got everybody together over a course of a time, maybe one day, maybe a series of days, and we trained everyone, right? But what happens when someone, you hire 10 people next week or 100 people next year? How do those people get trained? What is your mechanism for getting people up to speed when they move departments or do that kind of thing? So we've learned too that we've got to start early with training. We actually started in parallel with actually the project, so we don't wait to the end. So by the end, we have champions, we have people that know how to use it, and we have a process at Go Live of these are your champions. This is how often we're going to do lunch and learns. We've got a calendar set up. We're going to do webinars, brown bag lunches, whatever the heck you want to call them, so that we can continue to get people engaged and show people what they can do with SharePoint. So even if you do all these things, and even if you adapt your education methods, and you guys take some of these things and say, yeah, it's great, we ought to do that. If you do all these things great, I've got some bad news. It still won't be enough, because one of the things that we found for people to change and adopt and do things differently is to help them understand why. People, and we've seen this time and time again, We've done all the great training and seen organizations that had, I mean, they had digital academies and training programs and learning management and did all the equipping that they could do, right? Everything that they could do for these users. But what they failed to do was connect the dots for the user and help the user understand, why am I doing this new, right? Why am I doing it a new way? What does it mean? Who does this even help? What's in it for me, right? I mean, that's what your users are actually asking. I mean, if we're going to be honest, right? So, you know, helping them understand, why the heck am I doing this differently? And you guys, again, going back to your plan, you guys have to define that. If you can't define it, there's no way you can tell your users how to do it, right? And so you've got to help your users understand why. And there's been tons of studies recently on change management, and a more recent one that I read last year on digital workplace was a sense of why. Connecting your users to purpose and the connection of why they're doing something was the #1 reason above training, above anything else, for getting people to change. So as we kind of close out this session, what I want to do is I know these are big buckets. I know these are big areas, 5 steps. You know, I would love to be able to give you guys 5, like, do these things. There were some practical things baked in here. I hope you guys really got some good nuggets of information. But if you guys can use this as a checklist, turn it into a checklist for your project, and as you plan and as you migrate, as you do your next project on SharePoint, make sure you're just being intentional about these 5 areas. Just use it as a litmus test to say, hey, are we putting people first? Have we thought about that? Are we thinking about bridge building? Are we doing that? What roadblocks do we have? If you guys could do that, to me, that will be a win. You guys will be a lot further along. But these are the top 5 things that we see in the top 5 steps that will get you to better adoption. I guarantee that. One of the things I want to share with you guys, I've mentioned a couple webinars. I've highlighted the SharePoint ones. You know, we do a ton of stuff here with SharePoint, CRM, digital marketing, those kind of things. Today's is on the top left there, so ignore that one. But this is our event site. If you go to events.c5insight.com, we got tons of webinars, 2, 3, 4 a month sometimes. You'll see I've got a Building a Better Intranet there. I've got one on July 7th with Visual SP. We're doing all kinds of things. The Building a Better Intranet is really good because I dig into the content piece, and I really talk about what are some things that we can do to build better intranets for our organization. So I would encourage you, if you're part of CRMUG, do the one on June 7th. Otherwise, do the one on July 7th. And what I want to do as we close out, when this closes, you guys will get a survey. Please fill it out. It will help me a ton to know if this thing just sucked, if it was great, if you guys liked it. Here's the links that I know you guys want. If you want to go download these, you can get the SharePoint feedback tool I showed that will really help with adoption. There's the link for that. Take a screenshot, whatever you want. And if you guys want this PDF that you can download and kind of fill it out, and we've got a ton of resources too. If you go to those areas, you'll see a menu and it'll show resources and add-ins, and we've got a ton of things there that you guys can do. So please fill that out and go there and download these. Encourage you to do that. Please let us know. And you know, more importantly, I mean, share your story with us. I want to know kind of where you guys are. We're not going to heavy sales pitch you. We know we could help with these kind of things. If you guys are in the market and looking for a firm to kind of help, we can certainly help. But I'm more interested in you guys just trying to get something out of this. And really, I want people to use these tools because they're great tools. So reach out to me. Reach out to any of us here, and please let us know if you've got any questions. I thank you so much for your time today, and appreciate you being here. Please, again, reach out if you've got any questions. Thank you, guys. Have a great day.